So the topic I want to talk about today, or maybe it's better put that I want to answer a question that I receive somewhat regularly on the channel, is why do I embrace the stereotype of cops and donuts? This usually comes about because every Friday on this channel is Donut Day, where I'll take a different donut shop and I'll review their donuts, and I record a video of myself shoving donuts in my face while making inappropriate sexual innuendos about said donuts. Well, one of the reasons that I embrace this stereotype of cops eating donuts is because for some reason people think that yelling something about a cop eating donuts is an insult. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing is that I have a guy, let me see, I'm going to put his picture right here. This guy's name is Michael. Michael and I had a very strained relationship for a long period of time. Michael was in dire need of some mental health treatment, and for maybe longer than a year, he refused to go get said treatment. And this encounter that he and I had, where I ate a donut with him, is the one that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And that is how I convinced him to go and get some treatment for himself and to kind of improve his life. So in order to tell this story, I want to start at the beginning. Now, when I worked third shift, I drove the same car every single day. When you drive the same car, you're responsible for the same cruiser district, the same part of the city, all the time. And when you're doing that, you get a handle on who's going to call the police frequently. And when you respond, you're not starting at square one every single day. You're like, oh, I've dealt with you, this time, this time, this time. On my district, when I had a regular district, right now on my first shift, I don't have a regular district, but that's besides the point. There were plenty of times where I could show up on a run and I could just call people by their first name. I'd say, Michael, over here, Ralph, over here, this, that, and the other thing. Or I would have people that when I showed up, they would recognize me and they would do a variety of things. They would say, here's that MFer again. Or they would say, oh, thank God it's you. Like, you're the cool one. I've talked to you before. It's not that I'm particularly cool. It's just that we've talked so many times that we know each other. I know how they're going to react, and I know how to treat them accordingly to make sure that we have kind of a smooth interaction. But the first time I met Michael was not so smooth. He called the police, which I'm the police, in the middle of the night about a parking complaint. When I got out there, he lives on this side street, and he wanted every single car on his street damn near to be ticketed and towed because they were facing the wrong way in traffic. They weren't necessarily, it wasn't a violation. They were parked in gravel along the side of the road, which is curtilage, and it's not necessarily a violation, but he was incredibly pissed off for some reason. He wanted those cars to all be out of there. When I began to question him about, it's like, hey, I understand they are all facing the wrong way, and I'll look into that, but what's really going on? And he's kind of avoiding the topic, and then finally I get him to admit that his neighbors have a band, and they were up practicing late into the evening, and when he went over and asked them to be quiet, they refused to do so and probably called him some names. So that's when he decided to pick up the phone, just like everybody does, call 911 and try to get his neighbors in trouble. When I'm in a situation like that, I'm even less likely to do what you say when you call, because I'm not going to allow you to use me as a weapon against your neighbors. Just kind of a thing that you pick up on after being a police officer for a little while. So Michael, he was not happy. He was pissed off, as a matter of fact. He starts calling me names. He's making jokes about my weight, which I don't know. I'm not the smallest guy in the world, but I think I've done all right for myself. Then he starts calling me. This was the insult that he started using every single time that I saw him for the next year and a half or so. He's like, you fat donut eating motherfucking piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. That's basically every interaction that I had with Michael was a very similar interaction to that. After that night, the calls started to escalate. There were times where he would call 3, 4, 5 times a night. He was calling for ambulances because he thought he had some kind of problem with his brain, some medical problem in his brain. It got to the point where he would treat the medics with so much disrespect that they became afraid to go to his house without a police escort. Because we know who the first responders are and who the second responders are. But regardless, some of the things that he would call in about was he would think people were breaking into his house. He called in burglaries in progress all the time. And often you'd have officers running lights and sirens, running through stop signs, damn near killing each other to get to his house. Walk around and check the exterior just to find out that nobody had ever done anything. One of these times, it was in the middle of the night. I think everybody was tied up and I was clear. He called in saying somebody was breaking into his garage. So I pulled up to his house. I parked at the end of his driveway. And when I realized where I was, because at that time I didn't have his address memorized, when I realized who it was, I started to walk a little bit more slowly. So walking up the driveway, and he comes running down the driveway, and he's like, it's you. He's like, you lazy piece of crap. He's like, they're getting away. He's saying that they ran down the alley behind his house. He's like, you better run. You better go get them. Now, at that point in time, I'd probably been a police officer for about 7 years. And there's one thing I learned up until that point is that you don't just go running after people if you don't know what's really going on. So I don't. It's extremely rare, unless I have a lot of very good specific information. It's going to be extremely rare for me to pull up on a scene, have somebody yell and tell me to go running that way, that I'm actually going to go running that way. So I'm walking up to him. I'm like, hey, go ahead and tell me what's going on. He's like, well, they're getting away. They were trying to break into my garage. I mean, we went back and forth to the point where, he was like, you're not going to do anything anyway. You let them go away, you lazy piece of crap. And then he's telling me that the cops over some other city are way better cops. And I walk around his garage. I look. He starts pointing out things that he says are fresh damage. And you look at him, and it's clearly damage that's been there for a decade or more. These type of things started happening more and more frequently, to the point that when I would show up, rather than even walking around the perimeter of his house, I would say, Michael, you're having some kind of mental episode right now. There's nobody breaking in your house. There's never been anybody breaking in your house. What you're dealing with is some kind of mental health episode, and you need to go get treatment. And that would just make him mad, and he would tell me to go F myself, shut the door, wouldn't come back out. This continued on for months. And after a period of time, some things started to go south in his personal life. He was losing his house. He had no electricity, no running water. I knew he didn't have a job. I can't remember if he was getting Social Security benefits. But he was basically homeless, but living in this house. And he has some kind of severe mental health disorder. So I was trying to get him some help. I went down to the local crisis center. I submitted some paperwork to have him probated. They assured me that this was going to go through. When it got signed by a judge, they actually called me and said, hey, a judge signed off on the order. The sheriff's department's going to go out and pick him up, and we're going to get him in treatment, and he'll be all right. Well, the weird thing is, about 2 weeks go by, and I'm answering another call about this guy. So I called down to the crisis center, and I say, hey, I called and I had this guy put on a probate list. You said that the deputies were going to go out and get him, bring him in, force him into treatment. And here he is out on the street. So they look it up. To make a long story short, those things expire, and they were unable to track him down prior to the court order expiring. So here he is with an expired court order where he needs to get in treatment, and he's not getting treatment. I was able to get him back on that list, and she assured me that the next day it would probably be back in front of a judge, and since all the groundwork had been laid, they shouldn't have any problem getting it re-signed. And I had made the decision that I was going to be the one that brings him in. It's not something that we generally do. Normally the sheriff's department serves probate orders, but I was going to do what I could to convince him to get into that mental health facility. And then once he was there, they were going to serve him with these papers saying, hey, by the way, you're not allowed to leave until you've been properly evaluated. So after having that conversation and dealing with him that evening, I dealt with him again in the morning. So I dealt with him that evening, and then I had the conversation. So in my mind, I was like, all right, tonight when I get into work at 11 p.m., I'm going to call down to this crisis facility, verify that that order is good, and then I'm going to track him down and I'm going to get him into treatment. Well, before I had the opportunity to do that, before my shift was over, I had another run encountering and dealing with the same guy, Michael. He was down on one of our major streets harassing firefighters again. So I pulled up. The firefighters didn't want anything done. They just wanted him to leave them alone. So I talked to him, and he's leaning into my car talking to me. And he's calling me a fat donut-eating piece of crap. Even though we had a fairly friendly relationship at that point, he was getting to the point where when he said that, he was joking with me. And I turned to him and I said, you know what, Michael, I've got a proposition for you. I was like, you clearly need to get into treatment. If you are so keyed in on the fact that you think I'm a fat donut eating piece of crap, I was like, how about tonight when I get in, I'm going to pick you up at your house at 11 o'clock. I'm going to take you up to Donuts. We're going to sit down, have a donut. But then after that, if I eat a donut in front of you, you have to agree that you're going to go down to a treatment facility. Well, he agreed. So I went into work that night, went up to his house, picked him up, and here we are again. This is me and him having a donut. I had a donut and a cup of coffee, which it was like 11:15, real early in my shift. Way too early for me to be eating anything and having another cup of coffee, because I generally have one right before work, but regardless. He had a donut and a thing of 2% milk. Odd thing is, he drank the entire milk. He didn't even finish his donut. It's too sweet for him. But I was able to use that to convince him to go down to the crisis center and get checked in. Once he was checked in, he was there under probate. I hadn't seen him for quite some time after that. He kind of disappeared off my radar, which to me is a good thing. If I'm dealing with someone regularly and then all of a sudden I don't hear from them again, well, it could be two things. Could be that they're dead, or it means that they're doing better and they're not interacting with the police anymore. The funny thing with him was he was still going to like soup kitchens and homeless outreach type places. And the thing he started doing was every officer that he went up to, I'll call myself Ben for the sake of this conversation. And he's goes up to one of my buddies and he would say, hey, do you know Officer Ben? He's like, that guy is the best officer that I've ever met. He's the best officer of the department. He used to be training all you guys, blah, blah, blah. So then this officer would come to me and tell me that story. And I was getting that everywhere. I had so many people coming up to me, tell me, oh, I ran into this guy Michael the other day and he was just singing your praises. And I have to tell them the story about how when he first met me, he thought I was a fat donut eating piece of shit and yada, yada, yada. But regardless. And then I ended up running into him, I don't know, at some point. I think he went to a group home and I had to run there for somebody else. And I walked in the door and there's Michael and he's like, Ben! He comes up to me, gives me I think he even gave me a hug. He's telling me that he was on medication. He was no longer using cocaine. Everything was just doing so much better. He had someone who drove to his location with his medications and made sure he took them. So his other problems too, like his blood pressure and whatever the thing was in his brain. I think he had to take some anti-clotting medications or something. Everything was going better in his life. And he attributed that all to me forcing him to get into treatment. Well, the thing that I attribute that to was the donut. So the very thing that he was using as a weapon against me, and that a lot of people try to use as a weapon against me, which I can see in the monitors. Do I look like I eat a lot of donuts? I don't know. The lighting is kind of good right now. So anyway, the one thing, though, is people think that these stories always have happy endings, and they don't necessarily. If you work the street long enough, you'll find out that, you know what, I'm going to save that story for another day. This story, we're going to stop with, I used donuts to get Michael into treatment, and Michael's life was much better. I'll go ahead and give you a little tease that he didn't continue on that trend for very much longer. But I also know that today he's doing better again. I'll save that story for another time. But I hope you enjoyed this one. So thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.
you.